Thursday brings back the threat for severe weather across the Great Lakes region, or particularly across Ohio. In this video, we're going to talk about how severe those storms are going to be and a possible pattern change that could come in a long range that might bring us a summer heat wave. Hello everybody, the time is 12:44 p.m. and it is July 18th. Welcome to another update from Great Lakes Weather. Hopefully everybody is doing well today. And we've got a little bit of weather to talk about on Thursday, particularly across parts of southeastern Michigan, eastern Indiana, and then much of Ohio is going to be included in this as well. There's still a lot to be trimmed out about this setup, of course, up until the day of the actual event, but it does appear that there will be some potential for damaging wind gusts and hail, and maybe a slight chance of an isolated tornado or two across parts of Ohio. So we're going to dive right in with the forecast that we have for this particular event today. So here we have the SPC's setup for Thursday, what they have put out in regards to the potential for severe weather. And you can see that there is a slight risk area trimmed off across parts of eastern Indiana and much of Ohio, and also including northern Kentucky and southeastern Michigan. Now, you may notice that much of Michigan here is also included in the marginal risk. There is going to be some severe weather potential up in that area shaded in green as well. And depending on how the models trim this thing out, right now we're basing this off of only a couple models. More models start to come in that will give us better idea of what to anticipate with this setup. But I'm going to examine those models for you in this video and show you exactly why we're looking at that potential. But again, 15% chance of severe weather within 25 miles of a point at the current moment, and this is a day 3 outlook, so expect this slight risk area to change, whether it's going to be shifting west or east depending on what the models are referring to. So let's talk about what's going on in the atmosphere that is kind of giving us this setup for severe weather. So here we have a trough and a ridge on the southwestern side. Again, I've been talking about this pattern for quite a while. This is the pattern that we're kind of stuck in right now. And we're going to stay stuck in it for at least the next several days, and that's going to kind of bring us these thunderstorms and this thunderstorm potential that we are having. So you notice that this trough is sitting up here around the Great Lakes region, and you notice that will start to move out of the way, and you still have this southwestern ridge in place. Now, notice this trough begins to move into the Great Lakes region come Thursday morning. This is the trough that is going to bring us that severe weather potential in our area. All right, so you still notice that southwestern ridge still holding strong in southwestern part of the United States. That is going to continue over the next several days still, because the pattern that we're in, when we see this southwestern ridging, we typically have a heat dome that kind of surges into this area, and then this area in between, where you see the area between the trough and the ridge, kind of creates an imbalance, and that is typically where you'll see your low pressure systems go through. Okay, your systems, your weather systems, and you may notice that if we back it up to Thursday, we're right in that spot for those systems to really just move on through right along that region. Okay, so that's sort of what's bringing us our weather. You may notice that it's surging farther to the south, according to the GFS, later on this month. Okay, and that is actually going to cool down our temperatures some. But I do see, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I do see a pattern change that might bring our temperatures up a little bit across the Great Lakes region. You do notice the southwestern ridge still present by the end of the month, but you notice that they're starting to shift a little bit further to the east and starting to expand a little bit. We're going to get an expansion of a pretty large heat dome across the United States that could bring us the potential for a heat wave come the end of the month, the beginning of August. Okay, and that might surge our temperatures up into the 90s, make it feel like the upper 90s, even if it gets humid enough, depending on the moisture content in the atmosphere. But I do see a heat wave coming near the end of the month, based on what the GFS and what other models are saying with regards to the upcoming forecast. So that's something that's on the table, so just keep that in mind. But right now we're going to focus on the hazards for Thursday. All right, so let's go to the Euro model first, just to give a general idea of what exactly is going down with this setup. So Euro model, again, going to be quiet over the next couple of days unless you're in the southern portions of Ohio, southern portions of Indiana. You do have the potential to see some thunderstorms down there. But as we get into Thursday, you notice the system starting to come in out of the north, and then by morning on Thursday, you do notice there's some showers and thunderstorm activity going on across northern Michigan. Now, the expectation is that these storms will not be very strong, but there is going to be possibly a little bit of severe potential. You do notice the cloud bases are going to be pretty elevated. Not going to be any instability in the morning and there might even be a little bit of capping going on in the atmosphere as well, which will kind of make those storms not really draw much energy and survive long. But by the time we get to Thursday around 1 p.m., you do notice that some additional thunderstorm coverage begins to occur across Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. You get a sounding around these storms, still showing that marginal for severe potential. Temperatures are up in the 80s. Still have those elevated cloud bases, and you have Cape values around 1600. And really, the setup at 1 p.m. does not look super great for Michigan. Again, that's why it's a marginal severe setup for the southern Michigan as well. But as we get into later in the afternoon, you do notice these storms start to take off across parts of Ohio. There's actually going to be a little bit of wind shear in the atmosphere that will enable these storms to kind of draw on a little bit more energy. Wind shear is going to be not very strong, but we will have, it looks like based on what the models are saying, about 30 to 40 knots of wind shear with this setup. So it will enable some thunderstorms to take off, maybe packing some marginal tornado potential. You do see a few, ingredients coming together for this setup. You do have Cape values around 2,800. Cloud base is starting to get lower. You don't really have that really strong curvature in your hodograph that would account for stronger wind shear in the atmosphere. But you do see that there will be some thunderstorms taking off across parts of Indiana, eastern Indiana, and parts of Ohio as the system moves on through. And that is what I'm going to be watching on Thursday, and I'm likely going to be storm chasing in this region in Ohio once again, and areas down to the south. I won't be crossing the border, obviously. I don't want to chase in the mountains. That's just not smart. But this area will be kind of the planned region at the current moment to chase in. Anywhere west of Columbus and southward is kind of what I'm planning on at this current moment. So that's what is being shown on the Euro model. Let's get a little bit more into the dynamics of this setup. Again, here's the mid-level jet at about, I'd say 4 p.m. on Thursday. You do notice that you have winds in the mid layer of about 36 knots, 30 to 40 knots. Again, enough to fire some storms. Winds of 50 to 60 knots really are what bring the greater potential for more intense thunderstorms. But we do have that set up for maybe a few severe thunderstorms here and there, along with this wind shear that's going to be following along with it. You go to the 500 millibar layer. You also have winds in the upper levels that are favorable for severe weather, wind gusts of 40 to 50 knots in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So a few things still coming together for this setup that we have across parts of Indiana and Ohio. And there's still a lot to be trimmed out about this setup, but those are some of the things that you can see on here right now. Here's the Cape values at 4 p.m. Cape values of 2,000 to 3,000 across much of Ohio and Indiana. And that is basically the bare minimum that is favorable for severe weather is 2,000 or more. But along with that wind shear, that could associate with the wind shear as well, you could really have a little bit more of a takeoff of some thunderstorms with the instability and favorable wind dynamics in the atmosphere as well. Bulk shear, you do have some wind shear out in the atmosphere. Again, wind shear of about 30 to 40 knots still with this setup. So you'll definitely have that with this storm setup. Hodographs, you can get a look at the hodographs here. Again, hodographs don't look super favorable for tornadic activity, but it does look pretty favorable for perhaps a damaging wind event, probably some multicellular clusters coming together. And that's the SBC highlights that in their setup for this as well. Let's take a look more at a high definition model now. NAM3K, again, we don't have the HRRR yet, but I do look forward to when that comes out to actually take a look at what we might expect, because the HRRR does pretty good jobs at handling some of these events sometimes. But here we're getting into Thursday morning. You do see that low pressure system is off to the north, and you do have some storms firing across northern Michigan, just exactly what the Euro model shows. Now, the NAM usually likes to show a convective line setup in most of their model runs. So again, still showing that idea that there's going to be a few pop-up showers and thunderstorms across northern Michigan. And if you get a sounding ahead of those, it does show that severe potential. Little bit of directional shear at the surface, and you have speed shear in the upper levels of the atmosphere. Not really much storm relativity, though. You can see that right here, highlighting that there is a lack of storm relativity. It's going to be close to 100, but still not enough to really what we would expect for those tornado type setups with this storm mode in Michigan. But as we get into Ohio, I am going to be watching a little bit for more increased wind shear and more increased storm relativity. that could bring the potential for maybe a chance of a tornado. You see the storm multiplicity really does tend to pick up as you see those storms intensify later on in the afternoon. Cape values at 2200, storm multiplicity 60 to at the surface to 220 higher aloft. So again, strengthening wind shear could lead to increased storm multiplicity and stronger storms capable of producing more pronounced updrafts. So that's something to watch. This is as far as the run goes out. You can really see that it doesn't really show storms really taking off across northwest Ohio, but it does show that favorable environment for possible severe weather, including the chance of a weak isolated tornado with that as well. So northwest Ohio is still my planned target. That might change. I may dip down to eastern Indiana. I'm probably not going to stay in Michigan, but Ohio and Indiana do look like the places to be targeting with this storm setup that we have. So stay tuned for that. That will be on Thursday, probably starting around 2 o'clock, maybe 3 o'clock. It depends on when the storms really start to fire off. But I want to go back to what I was talking about with that heat wave. Currently, we're in a pretty warm stage in Earth's climate, I guess you could say. Not saying pretty warm setup with El Nino, and then pretty much across the equator, you have a lot of warming going on across parts of the ocean at this current moment, which is allowing for a bit more evaporation and a lot more moisture to be kind of carried across different places. You've probably seen videos of that flooding that's been ongoing in Vermont and New Hampshire. That's been pretty crazy to watch. So definitely want to keep them in our thoughts and prayers. But you do notice that the heat index across the Gulf of Mexico is in the 90s. Definitely pretty brutal if you're down in that region. But I want you to pay attention to what is going to be happening as we get into later and towards the end of the month. You do notice that we've kind of had the heat dome still across the southwest United States, and we've also had kind of heat kind of just building across parts of the southern United States. Heat indexes in the mid 100s, upper 100s in some places across Texas. Definitely very warm out there, and that's to be expected usually for this time of the year. But as we get into Thursday and Friday, you do notice that it still does dip down and kind of sits across Florida. You notice that Florida is getting heat indexes of close to 100 as well. So pretty strong heat dome that is currently sitting across that region. But as you get to the end of the month, you're going to notice as that heat dome, as I showed you with the 500 millibar height anomaly, is kind of going to be expanding across the southwestern United States, you're going to have kind of a build of heat widespread across the central United States, including the plains and even parts of the Great Lakes region as well, where heat indexes, this is the feels like again, not the actual temperature, the feels like, could reach into the mid 90s. But as we go forward into later on in the year, or the month, I would say, you do notice that heat really tends to intensify across much of the central plains. But as we get into July 31st, into the beginning of next month, you do notice that heat index of 100 start to make their showing across parts of the Great Lakes region. Again, though, keep in mind, long-range model, but we can get an idea that, hey, maybe there's going to be a heat wave later on towards the end of the month. And it shows that heat indexes could get into the 110s across Iowa and parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois. Pretty intense heat looking possible for that region as we get to the end of the month, beginning of next month. So just keep in mind, long range, we're looking at a potential heat wave. So just keep that in mind. But right now we're going to be watching this setup for severe weather across the Great Lakes region. That is going to be on Thursday. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully this video is helpful and informational in getting that information out to you. And I will continue to provide updates as things begin to come in, possibly doing a live stream about that. And then I'll be live stream storm chasing Thursday afternoon. So stay tuned for that as well. Thanks to all for watching and supporting. Make sure to subscribe and keep this whole thing going. And I will see you all later.